All right, Stewart. So let's start this interview off with July 28th, 2025, the crash that has changed your life for the last couple of months. You suffered a broken pelvis in multiple different spots, a compound fracture in your right leg. Now you've gone through therapy, the calendar's flipped, it's early 2026, you've been cleared, so you're gonna get back in the car soon. But first and foremost, how do you feel, physically and mentally?
I feel good, mentally good. You know, we were able to test a couple weeks ago here in North Carolina with the modifieds, and we ran 5 or 6 sessions, got about 50, 60 laps under our belt, and everything worked good. You know, my body worked well. I was pretty nervous and just a lot of butterflies, just the fact of the unknown. That's probably the longest I've been out of a race car in my whole life since I was a little kid. So getting back in there was all sorts of emotion, you know, but everything worked well. You know, my biggest problem was in my foot and in my ankle. And, you know, I got on track and didn't notice it, was able to go out there and run laps just like I always did. And the cars ran really, really well. So for myself and Tommy Conroy, my crew chief, who went through the accident with me, you know, every step of the way, you know, it was a big day for us just to get that behind us and kind of be able to focus on getting back to work now.
So let's start that night at Autodrome Drummond. What do you remember about the race?
Oh, I remember all of it. Thankfully, you know, I was in a really, really good seat. You know, Randy LaJoie builds the best seats in the business, I believe, and you know, not that everybody else doesn't, but I've been in LaJoie seats for as long as I can remember, and everything held up really well in the upper part. So, you know, the upper part of my body, my shoulders, my head, you know, everything did its job, all my safety equipment, and yeah, so I do remember everything. Just, you know, dipped off the backstretch, and the last thing I expected to see was you know, a concrete block, you know, about eye level, you know, sliding at it sideways wide open and going, oh man, this is going to be big. And, you know, obviously it was a pretty big wreck. You know, flipped, Mario Claire got into it, bounced us around a little bit. You know, the car broke in a bunch of different spots, and you know, just I remember being on the track in the car and just not being able to get out, you know. So thankfully, you know, the fuel cell was clear, and you know, our Schultz fuel cell did a good job. There was a flare up from the fuel in the lines, but none of the fuel came out of the cell. All the check valves did their jobs, and you know, I was able to take my time and assess the situation. Like, okay, I can't get out. It hurts really, really bad. I didn't know what hurt or why I couldn't get out, but you know, the safety team there, Andy and the whole group, the DIRTcar group did a great job, you know, getting me out, and you know, it's been pretty wild from that moment on.
So what were the following days like? You were taken to the hospital that night, and I believe you switched hospitals at least once in the following days as you needed surgery.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. You know, I remember got to the first hospital, Tommy and Jay Castamore came with me, and they were in the room, and Martin Roy, you know, a friend of Tommy's and Jay's, and you know, that worked with the Brett Hearn team too back in the day, and he came with us, and thank goodness he did, so he was able to translate and, you know, kind of explain to me what I had broken, what was going on. Went in for an MRI right away, and it was just, everything hurt. You know, every time they picked me up and moved me from a stretcher to the backboard and to another bed and back and forth, it was just a ton of pain. And, you know, then I was like, okay, what do we do? I could wiggle my toes. I lost a little feeling in like the bottom of my toes, which is kind of weird to explain. So there's a little bit of nerve damage there that's still actually kind of healing. So hopefully that comes back a little bit. It's not affecting me in the race car at all. It's just kind of a weird feel. And I had that right from the onset of the incident. I could, you know, wiggle my toes and feel the tops of my toes, but not the bottoms. So that was all something, you know, we didn't know why or how or what, and, you know, in the hospital, and it was pretty wild.
How many surgeries did you end up having?
Just one. So I went to a little hospital in Drummondville. From there, they transferred me to a hospital in Three Rivers, where a general surgeon, young girl, I forget her name, but she did an awesome job just putting an exterior kind of roll cage, it looked like, around my leg, got everything braced up. And at that point, then it was like, okay, because she came in and she goes, I can't fix you the way you need to be fixed. And the doctor that can is out for like the next 2 weeks. There's only like one other doctor in Canada that can fix you this way. And that's where it was like, okay, now I didn't really know what was going to happen. And that was the next afternoon, I guess noon, 1 o'clock. Thank goodness Jess, my wife, got there the exact same time as I'd kind of came out of surgery, the first one. And, she was there. Mike Maresca was awesome. Doc Maresca got involved and he kind of facilitated everything for getting us from the hospital in Three Rivers to the hospital at Albany Med, which is close to our house, and also had the best team that he could see from his end in the area to get me fixed back up. So Doc Maresca, like I said, orchestrated everything. Got an ambulance from our friends in Akwesasne that obviously we knew racing at Mohawk. So a couple guys came up in an ambulance that I knew and was familiar with. Jumped in there. They took me to Potsdam, where they did more X-rays and MRIs and checked me out again at Doc Maresca's hospital there. From there, I went on an airplane to Albany Med, and I wasn't there for very long, and they brought me right into surgery.
How long is this timeline? How long is this after the actual wreck?
That was, I guess so. That was the wreck was on Tuesday. I got to Albany Med probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, be Thursday morning, and that's when they started rocking and rolling.
So after surgery happens, road recovery begins. How long were you stuck just, laying up, doing nothing and letting everything heal?
A while. I was in Albany Med for just about a week, and I just got to the point where it was like, okay, I'll be better off at home than I would be here, and it probably wasn't the best idea, but after a week in the hospital, I'd had enough, and
you were ready to go.
Luckily, knew some friends in the hospital and was able to sign myself out and got home, and that was a big day. Just getting home. I forget, that was August 7th or 8th maybe at that point, and getting home and Jess it was all on her at that point. She was a superhero through all this, and getting back home and taking care of me, and I was pretty immobile for a few weeks there, and she got down and dirty, man, and took care of me and kept me cleaned up, and she was my rock star.
What was the therapy process like whenever you started that?
Yeah, so I'm still doing physical therapy, and it's really a lot of fun. A lot of people don't like it and that have had similar accidents or broken bones. They're like, oh man, PT is going to be tough, and I've honestly enjoyed it from day one. We got started probably mid-September, early October with PT, and my two, PT people, Rick and Mallory, have been great. They've turned into friends along the way. I go there 2-3 times a week and then try to work out on my own. We have a little gym in the basement that we set up, when I started doing the NASCAR stuff to stay healthy, that I don't use as much as I should, but just having that equipment at home has been big to be able to keep working out in the meantime. So it's been a long time. I started PT, I was just out of the wheelchair and got on crutches and was able to move myself around, and went from there to a cane beginning of December. Got cleared by my doctor, Dr. Chisnia, that put me back together. He, we did another X-ray beginning of December, and he says you're good to be weight bearing as pain lets you, because it still hurt pretty good. So since beginning of December to now, I've just been concentrating on working out, being as healthy as I can, and eating as healthy as I can, all that kind of stuff. It's been a little different, but it's good. I feel like I'm in a better mindset now than I've ever been to go back into a race season, and 75% of my body is fit as it's ever been, and we're just trying to get this leg caught up a little bit. But
so now that you're going to get back in the seat, you're going to get back to your normal, which is driving race cars each and every weekend. I guess after the wreck, you had to make the decision and think about what at some point every race car driver has to think about in their career is, do I want to continue to do this, especially after going through something like that? So was it always the plan to get back in the car, or did you have to consider if you wanted to continue to do it?
No, I had to think about it, and luckily enough, I got a lot of time, laying around, and obviously watched all the races on Dirtvision and kept up as much as I could with everything going on, and obviously we worked close with Alex Yankowski's team, so that kept me in the loop, and helping Alex, and being able to be a outside part of his team as he competed for the championship this year, and once I finally got back to the racetrack, I wasn't sure. I didn't know if if it was something I was going to want to do, if I was going to be messed up too bad to be able to do it properly. And I got back to Fonda, I think it was 2 weeks before the Fonda 200 for their last regular season show, and Jess ran, and just getting back to the racetrack was big. And just being there back at the track, it was like, oh man, no, this is my life, and this is what I love to do, and I'll do everything I can to get back in the race car. So yeah, it'll be interesting, getting back in the first couple races, but I'm looking forward to it, and like I said, I'm 42 years old now. I've spent my life trying to get to this level of racing, and I think this is just a little bump in the road, so something we've had to go through. So
as you put what's unfortunately been a chapter of your life and a chapter of your career behind you, what's your biggest takeaway from the last 6 months?
There's a lot, First off, the outpouring of support that I got, throughout my rehabilitation and after the wreck, the amount of people that reached out or texted or called or sent cards or reached out to Jess was pretty big. That's probably the biggest part. It's like, man, I guess, you do this for so long, you meet so many great people in racing, and to kind of hear from everybody all at once was definitely overwhelming and something I was very thankful about. And it's like, man, we've done this a long time, but we've made a heck of a lot of friends along the way, and had a lot of great times with a lot of great people. Had a lot of great car owners over the years that I'm still in touch with, and that's my biggest takeaway. And just cherishing those relationships is probably my biggest takeaway. And then the second part of that is the relationship between me and Jess just got even more stronger than it already was. She's been my teammate for the past 12, 13 years. As we built a family together, and now, do all this at HFR together each and every day. So the whole deal of her, getting me back to health and nursing me back to health was no joke, and she was up to the challenge. She's a tough cookie.
You touched on it a little bit earlier, but to wrap this part of our conversation, what can this whole process say about the safety of bid block modified racing, and even the people that were working with you at the track that night after the crash?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to be honest. I think there's some work to do on the safety of big block modifieds, and I think there's some stuff that Bicknell did right afterwards to try to help out. There's a lot of flex in our frames, and there's a lot of grip because of that flex. So it's a double-edged sword. Racers don't want to give up the grip and make their stuff stiffer, but there's some stuff I hope that comes out of it that will make these things a little bit better going forward. But
who needs to lead that charge?
I think the guys that build 99% of the cars, need to lead that charge, and I think it needs to come from the top, from Brian Carter, and in the rule book. The rule book hasn't changed since my wreck, and that's something it bothers me a little bit. I wish I had a little bit of say in that. Not to go in too much detail about that, but I think there's some stuff that we can do to help these things out and just make a rule and be done with it, and then all the manufacturers can do it all together. But that's not my place as a racer to make the rule book. It's my place as a racer to try to beat the rule book.
You've raced a lot of different kinds of cars over the years. Do you remember your first time in a race car of any sort?
Oh yeah. I remember started in go-kart racing at Ransomville, our family track, and when I was 9 years old, I remember that clear as day, and was able to get in a friend of my dad's, Tommy Walker's Pro Stock, when I was 13, and go out, kind of behind the Packer trucks at Ransomville and run some laps. And then, after my uncle passed, my dad started racing his sportsman car, and I remember, one Sunday at Humberstone, he let me jump in and hot lap it, and that was my first time in an open wheel car. I think I was 14 or 15 maybe at that point. And I remember those laps like they were yesterday.
What was your role at Ransomville whenever your family went it as a kid?
Anything I was told to do. That was an awesome experience and a part of my life. I guess I didn't get it at the time, but to be able to work there every summer, it was usually every other summer, because I'd get into it with my dad and not want to work there for a summer, and I worked at a candle factory one summer, and then was back at the track, and then I worked at a gas station the following summer, and then the summer after that was back at the track. So, doing those real jobs kind of made me appreciate working at the track a little bit, and the stuff you get to do there. It was awesome. So, my grandfather owned the place and had it since the late 70s, and my dad and both my uncles when I was a young kid, and as we got older, we lost Alex, but my dad and Uncle Joel, working with them every day, and my cousins and my sister. It was just a really, really special time in my life from when I was 8, 9, 10 years old to the time I kind of moved away and got some rides going racing. I was there, whether it was, cleaning the shitters, painting the walls, mowing the weeds, helping with track prep, helping, replace grandstand boards. I remember one winter, they put up a new section of grandstands, and I got to be there shoveling stone and just doing fun stuff. And that was just like core memories that I'm so glad I got to make. And it was just really, really special, those years of my life.
Growing up on the border of Canada and New York, obviously you're from Niagara on the Lake, grew up there, traveled to race in New York and be around your family's track there. Was it ever really a question that you'd end up going anywhere than the Northeast Mod route and ultimately end up in bid blocks?
No, I mean, I knew from a young kid, so we did all that work during the week, and then on Friday nights I got to run the lap counter. So I just thought that was the coolest. I was in the scorer's booth next to the announcers and had the best seat in the house to watch, Danny Johnson and Pete Bicknell and Alan Johnson, Bob McCready, come in and race at Ransomville. And from that point on, I was like, man, I thought just being able to run a modified and watching those guys that made a living at it at that time, thinking like it would just be the coolest thing to be able to do that, not knowing how or how it would work out or what it took to do it, just knowing that I wanted to do it. And as things progressed and I moved away to school and I was able to get a couple rides and it did work out.
Last year, I got to drive across the U.S.-Canada border for the first time, and I thought it was crazy just how much of a process it was. You did it pretty much every week, I'm assuming.
We did it every day.
Was that tricky, doing it every day just for racing?
It wasn't until September 11th. That's when really things changed at the border, and it got tough for the Canadians to come across. Obviously we were different and had paperwork because we owned property in the United States, so it was a little bit easier for us, but that made it really tough for the racers, and that just back and forth between Ransomville and Merrittville and Humberstone, it was like the kind of the tri-track circuit, when I was really a little kid and before I was born. I think that kind of took a hit, and you see like Merrittville now has their guys, and it seems like Ransomville kind of has their guys, Williamson and Lindbergh, and there's a few that still bounce back and forth, McPherson and the Sportsman, but it's not like it was where, you could leave home at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you were at Ransomville by 5:30, 6 o'clock. Now there's just a lot more hoops to jump through at the border, but that all kind of changed after September 11th.
2005 was your rookie season with the Super DIRTcar Series, one of just 2 full-time seasons that you ran with the Super DIRTcar Series. Matson Motorsports, I believe, is who you drove for in 05. What were your early years in the bid block world like?
Chaos. Tore up a lot of stuff. Was just fortunate to have Madson's take a shot on me. I was driving for Mike and Lisa Maroney at the time. I started with Danny Miller, ran a couple races for him, and then Mike Maroney had built a car for Alan Johnson, and Alan had a deal driving for Jake Spraker at the time. And I remember we ran the Summer Nationals and ran third in Miller's car, and the next day I was out working on my Sportsman car and in the shop at the house, and Mike Maroney called and asked if I wanted to drive his car, and that was 2003, August of 2003. So I'd already been in university for a year, was planning on going back, which I did, and was able to run a dozen, maybe more races, close out the small block series with Maroney's, and just learned so much with them. We traveled a little bit, went to Quebec, did some of the stuff at Rolling Wheels and some of the small block Super Dirt series at that time, which was pretty big, and did those races with them, and then was planning on being back with them in 2004. Lisa had ordered another new car, and I went back to school, and I remember I just got a cell phone, and Dale Madsen called me on my cell phone. I didn't even know who Dale Madsen was or how he got my number. Obviously knew the Madsen team and Brett Hearn and the success that they had. And he called and said, we're interested in having you come drive for us. Are you interested? What do you got going on? I'm like, well, I'm in school. I'm in Windsor, Ontario. I'm 8 hours away from Albany. But we went, I think it was like the next weekend, my dad and I went and met with Brian Madsen and Dale and, their team. We met in Syracuse and we talked, and they came with a little contract, and it was like, man, we're going to pay you this much to drive the car. And it was like, oh man, like this is wild stuff. And I was like,
You probably never had a contract before.
No, never. I never got paid to drive before, you know. It was, you know, I spent every dime I had to go race, and when I was a kid, and to meet up with those guys, and then I was like, okay, I'm in. I didn't know anybody in Albany, New York. I'd never been to Albany, New York. I'd never been, you know, further than Fonda in New York, and yeah, at that point I was like, okay, we're in. So I finished out my second year at Windsor, and you know, moved in with Dale in April and lived with him and his family, and we went racing, went small block racing, and the first year, 2004, went really well. We won 12 races. It was really strong. Then we decided to move up to big block racing, and that's where the learning curve really started.
Do you kind of look back at getting that right with Madsen Motorsports as your first kind of big break?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, first for Mike and Lisa to take a chance, and even Miller to put me in good equipment, you know, to get going, and then go and jump in TO cars and run with Madsen's. That was huge, you know. And that first year in 05 on the big block series was definitely trial by fire. It was, you know, I got to learn more on the setup stuff, more on building the car than I'd ever been involved with before, and then learn all these tracks, you know, for the first time. So it was a pretty wild year. We were able to win a couple of races. We won one at Weed Sport and two at Canandaigua, and then they fired me at the end of the year.
You mentioned those early years being chaos, but by the 2010s, you're one of the best in the country. So how'd you go rather quickly from that to a guy that can go and win almost 400 races?
Just, I guess, being kind of stubborn and knowing that's what I wanted to do, and you know, having enough success to keep me going through the winter a couple times. And you know, after they let me go, I got in with Dave Thompson and his race team. We traveled a little bit. Didn't have the success at all, you know, that I thought we'd have off the bat, and he let me go by June, and that's when I'd kind of got over a learning curve. But then it was like, okay, how do I put cars together, keep them together, you know, work with product sponsors and all the stuff that you need to, you know, have a successful race team. You know, Brett Hearn has always been a mentor, you know, as I was out there on the road, you know, being in the TO camp and being really good friends with his nephew Matty and, you know, Bobby's son, and working with those guys. I was really fortunate always to be able to lean on him. And it wasn't setup advice, you know, he would never tell you what he had in the car, but if I needed to borrow a quart of oil, if I needed a set of gears, if I was somewhere, me and Matty were in Quebec one year, and Gordon Hearn was helping me, you know, set the bump on my axles and just doing wheel bearings and just keeping us going. So I was able to kind of learn the maintenance side and preparation side from Brett's team, and just by watching Brett's team, and you know, he set the bar. It was like, this is how your car's got to look. This is how your team has to look. This is professional racing, and that's what I've tried to kind of duplicate here today. So
we'll talk more about Brett in a minute. Whenever you know that you want to be a race car driver, you know this is what you want to do, and you get fired, if I understand correctly, twice within a year.
Yeah.
Did that make you question, okay, maybe this is not what I'm destined to do?
No, because at that point, I believed in myself, I guess, kind of pig-headedly, and I just didn't think I was in the right race team situation, and I don't think I was, you know, at those times. So, you know, when Dave let me go in 06, I moved to Cooperstown, and I was, again, in between years of school, so just bouncing around, having fun, knowing I got to go back to school in the fall, and moved in with Roger in Cooperstown, and he said, okay, I'm going to tell you how to make a little bit of money racing these cars. And we went to 5 Mile Point, and, you know, just short track in Binghamton, and went short track racing. You know, he had a couple cars, open small blocks, you know, steelhead motors at that time, and we went and ran 5 Mile on Saturday nights and Utica Rome on Sundays, where we had some success with Madsen's a couple years prior. So once I got in with Roger, and then it was all on my shoulders. Roger's like, okay, we don't have a lot of stuff, but we have a little bit of stuff, and you know, the money we take in, we're going to put back into the car, and I'm going to pay you a little bit, and that's where I really started to learn what I could do, what I couldn't do, and it kind of got me rolling, and how to chase some, maybe not just be wrapped up with chasing points, but all right, bounce around and chase some big money, some 4,000 or 5,000 to win races, and that kept me going through the winter a couple times, and when I was gonna, you know, strike out, and won a couple big races at 5 Mile, and it kept us rolling. With
close to 400 big block wins, you definitely cannot talk about your career without talking about Super Dirt Week. Let's talk about the first one. The first one comes in 2010. What was it like for you at that time to win that race?
It was pretty unreal. We had put together a really, really good car for Super Dirt Week. I went there the first time in 08. I went there with Madsen's in 05 and ran, and then went back in 08 with a team I had put together myself.
Your 5th attempt in 2010, whenever you won.
Yeah, it was early, but I'd known enough about the race and how to race the race and how to prepare for it. So I didn't think we were at a disadvantage that way, going up against, the Sweeteners Plus team and the Mohawk team and Brett's team, I never felt like a disadvantage when I got on the racetrack. Maybe we didn't have as much stuff or as much backups or parts and pieces, but when we went on the track, I felt like, I could run with those guys. And, we went there with car owned by Jeff Daly, Marty Burdick, who we lost a few years ago, owned the motor. I was pretty much, squatting at the Buzz Chew shop up in Inlet, New York, and Buzz and Spot crew chiefed it, and we used his hauler. Bob Cordova, from Pete's Logs, supply the fuel and tires. So I was able to kind of patch this whole deal together. And, Spot, Matty Hearn, the Rodchinsky boys, my buddy Lauren, like everybody kind of pitched in, and we didn't know it at the time, but we had a really, really strong race team once we finally got it together in 2010, and then we were able to go there and win the race.
So your wins in the 200, 2010, 2011, 14, 15, 16, and 2024. 6, do you have a favorite one? Can you pick one? That's good. Probably the first one. I mean, the first one was definitely the best, just to jump over that hurdle and win that much money at one time was unbelievable. But then it just kind of got us on the radar. Then we were able to attract a couple more product sponsors, a couple more real sponsors, a couple more rides, and from 2010 till when I got hooked up with Chris at the end of 15, I drove for 5 different car owners: Tad Parks, Tom Cullen, Jeff Daly, Marty Burdick. Was able to drive Doug Emery's sprint car a handful of times every year, and we won some races, so that was cool. But it got rocking and rolling pretty good there at that time, and it was just great race teams, really good people going racing with me. Eric Mack, who's my best friend now, like he started with us probably in 2011, 2012, once Jess and I kind of figured out that we wanted to be together, and I moved, in with her family. Eric started helping out, and we went racing a lot of times with Jeff Daly's stuff, just me and Eric, and would go win some races, and we had a lot of fun, but we always made sure we had really good equipment, and we had great guys that supplied that for us. So you talked about how much Brett Hearn means to you. Right now, after your win in 24 at Dirt Week, you're tied with him for the most wins in the 200 at Super Dirt Week. Is it important to you to be the first to 7 and break that tie? That's tough. I mean, not really. I just want to win it again. Every year, that's the biggest race. So the overall wins isn't really something that I think about. I just try to figure out how we can win it again, because winning a 200-lap race is tough enough, let alone being at Super Dirt Week. The change at Oswego, we were good there when it was hammer down and rough the first year, and I could just kind of get elbows up and got after it, and we were able to win the race. But then, it turned into a different strategy race, and then the track was slick, and we kind of lost the handle on it for a couple of years. So going into 2024, we really did our homework and figured out what we needed to do to have a car that was good at Oswego. I mean, we'd win races everywhere else, and then we'd go to Oswego and not necessarily be bad, but we were a 6th to 10th place car a couple of years, and it was like, okay, what do we do to get these things better? And we were able to come up with a package that worked really good in 24, and then Alex, ran the car this year and ran 3rd. So I'm excited to go back next year. So 6 total 200 wins. Obviously, you won the last at Syracuse. You won the first at Oswego. Do you feel like Super Dirt Week will always be a kind of a centerpiece of your career and what your legacy is going to be whenever you stop racing? Yeah, I think so. I think that winning that race is the centerpiece of anybody's career in Northeast Big Block racing. It's the one where that everybody watches, everybody knows about, everybody, in the NASCAR industry and in national motorsports knows about Super Dirt Week, and winning that race is huge on the national scale. Most would agree the 2010s era of Northeast Modified Racing is dominated by 2 people, Stewart Friesen and Matt Shepard. And if you talk about the 2020s, it's the 2 of you. You probably add in Matt Williamson. I want to talk about the 2010s era, though. You and Shepard. What was it like being neck and neck with him for so long and battling? It was tough. He had our number most times. His engine package at the time was really, really good, and
we were able to get a CC motor with Tom Cullen and run it at Utica Rome and on some big block series races, and it was like, man, that kind of raised the bar for the engines. They they went to the 18-degree heads, and that was big, and keeping big power but keeping it smooth, and I think that's where Shepard was smart enough to get that dialed in first. He knew how to do it. He knew what he wanted in a car, and when he kind of put his own team together there. I forget what year. I think it was about the same year I started with Chris, but he just the same thing. He knew what he wanted in a race car and how to put a team together, and had some strong support behind him to do it. So he set that bar pretty high for us, and I mean he still is setting it high. So
what's your relationship like with Matt?
I think we respect each other. I'm not going to say we're the best of friends, but we're obviously competing for the same piece of the pie. And the pie's not that big, so we've drank plenty of beers together and bullshitted. We've got into each other too at times, and been mad at one another. So that's what happens when you race 50, 60 races against each other a year, and he's the best in the business. So he, like I said, he sets that bar high for us, and it's something that we try to get to.
Big block modified racing and all of the Northeast in general, it's obviously a very special culture, a lot of really talented race car drivers, some really smart people that work on these things. And there's so many people, and I can tell you this from traveling all over the country, there's a lot of people outside the Northeast that don't necessarily know what's going on in the Northeast, and they don't understand what that's like. Do you think that the big block world needs to stay in the Northeast to maintain what it is, or would you like to see it expand maybe to the South, maybe to the Midwest, and maybe the West Coast?
That's a really good question. I would love to race more tracks all over the country with our cars. I think they'd race really good at Knoxville. I know they race good at Eldora. We've been there a couple times, but it's just a unique culture. There is so many racetracks in the Northeast. They all pay really good money. And there's so many race teams right there, like I feel like if you look back, like way before we were born, you go back into like the 50s and 60s, everybody down here in the South all over ran, coupe body modifieds. And then they went from there, those coupe body cars, and you're talking like Florida, like Blue and the Allisons, that's what they grew up racing, like jalopies and all that stuff, or was it almost a coupe body modified? They kind of went to a late model or a sprint car, and then they put a wing on a sprint car. And then in the Northeast, they went to something like this that's relatively in between. It's not a late model, it's not a sprint car, it's a center steer chassis with definitely a unique suspension. So I think that's where we've kind of got on our island. It's a really, really big island, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely unique from the rest of the country in that I feel like there's so many tracks so close together.
You mentioned sprint cars. Sprint cars pretty popular in New York and Canada, where you grew up. ESS has been around a long time. So you grew up around them. What made you go, okay, I want to drive a sprint car?
I think just the speed and seeing them go. And I got to hot lap one at Ransomville on a practice day, a super slick, dusty track, and really wasn't worth the shit, but went out and ran some laps, and it was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I don't really fit in them really good because I'm pretty tall. But obviously Jess and I being close, and then her and Doug Emery, who worked together early in her career, and getting to know Doug a little bit. And then, he got to the point where he's like, I'm getting out of the seat and you want to come run some races? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So actually our first race, we went to East Bay in the winter, and I think it was the beginning of that 2010 season. We went down there and ran East Bay, the king of the 360s, and got to race against Gary Wright from Texas, and these national guys, and I'm like, holy smokes, Schaefer was there, and these guys that I only read about in the magazines, and that's before online streaming where you could watch everybody whenever you wanted to watch them. So it was cool. We went down to East Bay and we qualified for the big race, and I think we ran 9th or 10th. But getting out there with those guys was like, okay, this is cool, and I can do it, like I could hang with those guys. So we came back and ran some ESS races with Doug, and were able to win some races on tracks I was familiar with, and then always kind of dabbled in the sprint car stuff over the last, 10 years or so.
What do you think made you able to adapt to driving them pretty quickly?
I don't know. I don't know. I think running a big block with our tire, and as hard as the big block big block is to control, throttle wise. I think that helped me on the slick stuff in the sprint car. A lot of sprint car guys are wide open, spinning tires, banging it off the cushion, and just having a little bit more throttle control than some of those guys I was racing against at that time when the tracks got slick. I think helped a little bit, and Doug knowing what to put in the car for what I needed. I didn't know anything about setting up a sprint car. I still really don't. I know a little bit, but that was, I think, my advantage, where I could get out of the car and just be like, it's loose, it's tight, and Doug would adjust the shocks and change bars and do everything that he needed to do, and we'd go out there and we had a lot of success doing that.
2015 at Schweiken, you win a World of Outlaws sprint car race, and you didn't back your way into it or have it handed to you. You started 7th, and you drove by Donnie Schatz in the slick. Could you believe that? 10 years later, can you still believe it?
No, it was that was wild. And the coolest part about that was doing it with Jess. And her team. She had put together a really good sprint car team and was racing, and we decided to get married and start a family. And she was pregnant, and I was pretty much like, okay, I'm going to drive your car now. And she didn't really like that. She ran a couple races when I think she was 1 or 2 months pregnant before she got out, and I jumped in and started running her car, and it was the same way. She knows her way around a sprint car, can set them up.
She won the Canadian Sprint Car Nationals.
Yeah, and she learned from guys like Guy Forbrook, and she went and ran with the All Stars for a little while, and went out there and ran and learned from the national guys, and when it gets slick and the stuff got in our favor at that time, we were good, and that night was pretty cool because we timed decent. We made the invert, beat Pittman in the heat race, and so we made the dash. We were all excited, and I said, okay, now I know what to do. Let me take some stagger out of this thing. Let me do what I want to do. And she said, I'll give you the dash to screw this thing up, and I'm putting it back to how I want for the feature. And sure enough, yeah, I went out in the dash, and it was all balled up on the right rear, and it wasn't in the track at all. And I came off, we were in last in the dash, and I was like, okay, that didn't work. So we'll put it back to the way you want. And she went and got that thing dialed in, and it was really, really good in the feature. We were able to roll the middle and throw some sliders back and forth with shoe chart. That was like when he first started. We were pitted right next to those guys.
That night, you took the lead from him. You guys were both battling for your first Outlaw win. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't realize that. And he's had a pretty damn good career since then. So
I know you appreciate sprint car history, and you've kept up with it. So at the time, and even still now, had to be pretty cool to just be the second ever Canadian to win a World of Outlaws sprint car race.
That was big. To do it on Canadian soil at Schweiken, in front of Jess's sponsors, John and Wendy Brush from Corpac. It was huge. We didn't expect that going in, but it worked out in our favor that night, and we were able to get one on them.
You still plan to race a sprint car a couple times a year like we've seen in the past?
I don't know. We'll see. My legs got a little bit of limited mobility, and I'm tight in those things. So I was able to go up this summer and run with the Outlaws at Oshwegan in one of Glenn's cars, and that was awesome. It was a lot of fun. But the game's changed a little bit since we did it, in 2015. But we were able to get qualified and run with them and run half decent. And we'll see if Glenn invites me back again. I'd love to.
2016, 2017, in that area, your career starts to go down a different path. How did you meet Chris Larson?
Met Chris Larson at Eastern States in 2015. He has built an ultra successful construction company at Halmar, and obviously saw them get into modified racing in 13, 14, 15. Willie Ochmoody put a team together, and they had a pretty big splash at Dirt Week in 2015. Alan Johnson was supposed to drive the car. He quit midweek. They get Jimmy Horton to drive the car. There was just a lot of news around that team all week, and they came in with a huge trailer and all these beautiful cars, and I was like, man, who is this guy? They kind of came out of nowhere, and so got to know Willie a little bit. He had TO cars, and I'd done a couple TO seminars, and got to know Willie. So after we won Syracuse, he called me and he says, Chris Larson wants to meet you at Eastern States. I'm like, all right, yeah, cool. I'd like to meet the guy, and see what he's all about. And we went to Eastern States with Daly's car and CG Morey's truck and trailer that we borrowed, and drove in, and then we just got our dog Charlotte, and she was riding in the front with me, and we wheeled that thing in the pits, and I got out of the truck, and Chris was there, and met him, and we talked about everything other than racing. It was an interesting conversation. That's kind of started our relationship. He's somebody I really look up to on what he's done in his life. being a former Marine, starting, these construction companies, and ending at Halmar now, and it's a lot of interesting conversations if you get through his shell, and we sat there and talked for an hour or so, and didn't talk anything about racing. It was, you're married, Jess was super pregnant at that point, and you're having a kid, and blah blah blah, and he said, all right, well, after Eastern States, let's get together, beginning of December or whatever, end of November, December, come down and we'll have some lunch and see if maybe we can put something together. And that's how it all started.
So at what point, who brings up the idea, hey, let's build a NASCAR truck and go to Eldora?
that was all.
Eldora is where it started, right?
Yeah, that was all on Chris. Gary Ballou was helping his team at the time, and I've got to be pretty good friends with Gary over the years, and there's an interesting cat all on its own, is Gary. But we went and had lunch, went to his office. He took us to a burger joint, and we went and had lunch, and we just started shooting the shit and hashing out, how we could race together. And I kind of told him where I was at with the guys I was driving for. That was all pretty stable and well and good. And he told me his ideas. And part of that lunch, he said, what would be really cool to do would be to put something together and go do that truck race at Eldora. And I said, yeah, right. Okay, let's build a modified team here, and then we'll cross that bridge. I think we're still building that bridge, but it worked out. We were able to go buy a couple trucks. Gary helped out. Willie was huge putting that all together then, and worked out at Billy Hess's shop, right down the street from Junior Motorsports, and which was just a fab shop, and put a couple trucks in there, and he helped us get us to the track and get haulers facilitated, and that's where I really learned, you don't just load one up in the trailer and you go to the track. You got to have 10 guys with you. You got to be able to get this thing through tech. There's just so much more. It's such a bigger scale than anything I was ever used to. And we went and did that, and here we are.
So how does one truck race at Eldora turn into a full-time NASCAR truck team?
I think it just had a snowball effect, and it was just something that, we both got a little taste of, Chris and I, and said, man, this is something that we want to do and want to get better at. And that was 10 years ago. It started with one race at Eldora. Then we had those two trucks, and we went and ran New Hampshire, Vegas, Bristol. The first race after that, on the pavement. And I remember Bristol, getting in a seat that I got from Chad Boat. So the size of Chad is a little bit smaller than me. So that was the seat that I had, and
how did you make that work?
I pulled all the padding out of it because he had an insert in it and stuff. And I said, all right, this is no big deal, and went and ran 200 laps.
Couldn't have been comfortable.
No, not at all. Went and ran 200 laps at Bristol, and about killed myself and poured myself out of the truck after the race, and went, whoa. I think we managed to finish the race, but we were a couple laps down, and then it was like, whoa, okay, if we're going to do this, we got to get serious, and Chris was ready to get serious.
So before that, had you had any thoughts of going to the pavement world at all?
Not much. I'd ran a couple pavement modified races, ran the Oswego 200 for Ricky Kluth. I think that was 2012 or 13. Went and ran his modified there, and Jimmy Blewett got me hooked up with a ride at Turkey Derby. Ran the wall modified race 1 year for Barry Jost, and I had a little bit of experience in pavement stuff, but other than the modified stuff, that was it. I didn't run super late models like all the guys I was racing against, or any of that. So we just jumped in with both feet, and it was a big learning curve.
Did you have to spend any time weighing whether to pursue the NASCAR thing full time or continue to try to build your bid block legacy? What did both sides of that choice look like?
No, when you get an opportunity like I had to go racing, on the biggest stage, it was like, man, I'm all in, and I still am with it. This team here continues to grow, and it's something I Jess, myself, Chris, we've just poured our heart and soul into this deal the last 10 years, the last 5 here at HFR, and we're definitely not done yet.
2019, just a few years after you guys were on the road full time in NASCAR, you were in the Final Four at Phoenix competing for a championship. Did it surprise you that quickly you guys were championship contenders, and what's allowed a team that kind of came together unexpectedly to be so successful and sustain itself for 10 years?
Yeah, well, the one thing I learned really quick is in pavement racing, you're only as fast as the horse you're riding. You can only make that thing go so fast, and you can do some things and stretch it out and baby it or trick it sometimes along the way to get some speed out of it. But, 2018, we got hooked up with the GMS team and went and basically leased their trucks and ran out of their shop. And that was big. We had ran some other races and kind of struggled and was like, man, I don't think I'm this bad at this. And once we got in a GMS truck, we went and ran 5th at New Hampshire, and it was like, oh, running 15th, to 20th for, half a season and just struggling, and like it just kicks your ass. You're driving, like I say all the time, man, the guy driving in 20th is driving way harder than the guy leading, and that is 100% correct. It's tough to make these things get around the racetrack when they don't want to go around the racetrack. And once we kind of realized, okay, we need to get in some good equipment, got hooked up with the GMS team, and did a lot of things wrong. Probably should have won 5 or 6 more races than we did. We had pit road penalties. I screwed up restarts, and we lost them in every which way he could. But in 2019, we finally won the Eldora dirt race, which is our big goal, and then went to Phoenix and won Phoenix and got in the Final 4, and that was huge.
Do you see yourself racing in NASCAR a while longer?
I hope so. I feel physically as fit as I ever was. Obviously there's younger guys coming, and we've built a heck of a team here. So maybe somebody will get in my seat in the next couple of years, but I'm not ready to think about that yet.
So you've driven all these different types of cars. You've won in big block modifieds, you've won in sprint cars, you've won in NASCAR trucks, and we see more so nowadays, I feel like than ever, guys bounce around between different types of cars, and not just that, but between dirt and pavement. Mm-hmm. What's one talent that a driver across the board has to have to be able to jump in any kind of car on any type of surface and be good like you've been?
I think the biggest thing is to be able to, obviously have a good team behind you in any type of car, but be able to push that car to the limit and then talk about it. Give your team a little bit of feedback. I need this or I need that. You don't have to tell them what to do, but being able to give good feedback and be right about that on what the car is doing and what it might need is probably the biggest thing that young drivers can work on and be good about it. You see Larson and Bell, and Larson admits, he goes, I'm not a mechanic, but I know he can get out of that race car and tell who's ever working on it what it needs to be better.
I think there's a lot of people that would love to know, so I've got to ask, how does one go about asking a fellow competitor that you've raced against on a date and eventually ask them to marry you?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Jess and I first crossed paths, I want to say it was 2002, maybe 2001, 2002. We were both really super young, just kids racing sportsman cars, and knew about her a little bit. This good-looking blonde that's wearing a fire suit. She's racing. It's like, man, how do I get to know her? And we crossed paths at Rolling Wheels in the pits on an afternoon race, and it just happened. I was walking back from the parts truck or something, and she was walking back, and we had to walk right by each other. And I'm like, okay, I seen her coming. I'm like, here's my chance. And all I could say was, hello. And she said hi back. She said hi, and like didn't break stride. And I'm like, all right, I'm on her radar now.
Game,
yeah, I'm in the game, and here we are, 20-something years later.
So you guys got married in September of 2014. I found this in an article on the internet. Do you remember, what were you guys doing 2 days after your wedding?
We went race sprint cars against each other and ran first and second at the Cole Cup. Yeah, at Utica Rome, big 360 race. Yeah,
that had to be fun, racing against each other just days after you tied the knot.
That was awesome. Yeah, our wedding, was in the end of race season in September. We couldn't give up a weekend for it, so we got married on a Thursday afternoon in the big field beside our house, and threw a huge party, and we invited everybody we knew. We said, everybody, we're just going to come have this big party. We set up a big tent. We had an awesome band, and thinking, okay, probably half the people got to work, or not one person said no. Everybody came. We had a blast.
Do you ever still get back on a hockey rink?
No, not as much as I wish I could. That was a big part of my life when I was 10 to 16, 17 years old, was playing hockey. And now where I live, the closest rink is 45 minutes away, and I haven't pursued it probably like I should. I've put skates on a couple times the last couple of years. We have a big pond, and a couple times a year it'll freeze right and just be super, like glass. I'll put my skates on, and I got a stick and a bag of pucks, and I'll go out there just to tell myself I can still do it, and I should join a men's league or something, but that's as far as it goes.
So I'm going to name 3 races that you've never raced in, and I want you to pick one and tell me which one you'd want to race in and why. Daytona 500, Knoxville Nationals, World 100. Which one would you pick?
Oh, man. That's a good question. Can I pick all 3?
Narrow it down to one.
Narrow it down to one. Man, I think as competitive as I am, and first of all, to go to the Knoxville Nationals and the World 100, we found this out. We got a late model a couple years ago that we played with, and it's like, you just don't jump in that. We had a couple good runs. I'll give ourselves a little bit of credit for that and a pat on the back that we did have a couple good runs. But to go race against all those guys that do it each and every week, 100 times a year, at Knoxville or World 100, that's the thing. I wouldn't just be like, yeah, I'm going to go do that race. If you're going to go do that race, you start in Florida in February and you follow that tour and you race your ass off to learn how to race with those guys, so you're prepared for those races. Daytona 500 is the biggest race in the country, in the world, quite possibly. And, knowing a little bit about drafting, I think I could hang with those guys a little bit better. So I would say probably the 500 would be one that's on my radar before I get to be at least 50.
You talked a couple of different times about, whenever you either had your own teams or you're driving for other people, you're working out at other people's shops. Now, both of your truck team and your bid block team are out of the shop here in Statesville, North Carolina. Friesen Racing, you've got employees. You don't even have to be here every day. How proud are you of the team you've built and just kind of the lifestyle that you've managed to build?
Yeah, very, very proud. Obviously working with Chris from where we started in the end of 2015 to now has just been monumental from what we've been able to build and do and be in the shop and all these guys, I guess they're all checked out now, but the guys that do work here sometimes, no, it's just unbelievable, really. We got the modifieds down here getting ready for Florida. We were able to go, test a couple weeks ago, and it's special. I cherish times in the shop just like as much as I like going to the racetrack. And when Buzz Chu let me work out of his shop out up in Inlet, that's where I learned a lot from Spot and Ernie and those guys. And they were in the Busch North series at the time, and we're getting out of it, so they had a couple Busch cars there, and I was like, man, what do you say, we take one of these cars and go race it once? And they're like, yeah, right, you got 50 grand to go, do a race? And I'm like, no way, it doesn't cost that much. And they're like, oh yeah, it does. They're like, no, you concentrate on your modified team and you'll be able to make a pretty good living. And that's probably the best advice I've got, along the way was from Spot when he just steered me in this direction. And it led me to Chris and here we are. So
it's 2026, you've been cleared, you're gonna get in a car. If all goes well and you can get back to the normal Stewart Friesen, what's 2026 hold and what's the future hold, not just on the racetrack, but in life too?
Probably to cherish a couple more moments. It was close to not being able to get back in a race car, and that's stuff I had to think about a lot. And to be able to get back in now, I'll hold some moments more dear. Being able, the traveling is something I love. I love going up and down the road. I love being in the race shop. I love being at the track. I love Saturdays at Fonda. After Saturdays at Fonda, hanging out with everybody in the pits and having a beer. Some of those moments I'll hold a little closer. And I'm just thankful that we'll be able to make more of those memories.
Well, hey, you've accomplished a lot in your career, and it's been fun to sit and talk about all of it with you. So thank you for being so generous with your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming and checking us out and spending some time with us.
Good luck this year.
All right, thanks, Connor.